The idea behind the show is simply asking guests what they would tell a stranger on a plane if they were sitting next to them and the stranger asked them for advice.
The scenery is passing very fast, but the seer is constant. The one who's seeing is the same.
Let me appreciate you for asking a question that I haven't been asked after 2,500 or so interviews over the years.
Is you have to drop the ego, which is everyone's greatest obstacle.
In 2008, Grant and I had been married for 4 years. I was pregnant with my first child. The economy was collapsing, and we were on the verge of losing everything financially.
Jordan, it's fantastic to have you here. And, I wanted to ask you the main question that we like to ask people. But before we go there, I want to ask you a couple of questions before that. So
sure.
First one I wanted to ask you is a question that, and I know this is a deep question to jump right in with, but it's a question I've asked many people over the years to the tune of, I've asked this question thousands of times, and I love to hear the different answers. I call it the time machine question. So essentially, it's as simple as this. If you could jump into a time machine, Jordan, go back and talk to a younger version of yourself and give him some life advice based on what you've learned in the years since, what do you think you might tell younger Jordan?
I would say this, this is a little cliche, I suppose, but you don't need business partners. And it's not because business partners are bad. It's just, I was, for a long time, I don't confuse that with you don't need anyone else. You need your network, you need your family, you need your friends, you need your support, you need your business connections. But for a long time, I was really like, oh, I can't possibly do this without help with other people who have skin in the game. And that was true for a while. But then after a while, I realized, me growing up in Michigan, my dad was so hardworking, my mom was so hardworking. I just kind of assumed everybody was like that. But then when I started a business, I had business partners that were like, oh, cool, I don't have to go to work now. So I'm going to get up at 2 p.m. and have a beer for lunch and then be done by 3 or 4 and then have, start drinking on Wednesday for the weekend. And I'm just like, these guys don't want to do anything. And I picked up the slack thinking, well, once we start making more money and we're more successful, these guys will realize that we have something and then they'll start to work harder. And it was actually the opposite. They were like, oh, good, Jordan's got this and we're making money. So I'm just not going to do anything. I'll see you guys when I'm back from Italy. And I'm like, why am I building the whole business? And so eventually I had this split with my partners. And this split with partners has happened a couple of times over the years, sometimes by me just having enough and making it my choice, and other times by asking to leave and coming up with a amicable split. And in the most recent one, an amicable split that the other side decided not to honor. And I realized now, just 2020 hindsight, I could have just built things on my own. I really didn't need these people other than at the beginning for a vote of sort of a confidence boost. But if I've got future Jordan being like, you don't need these people, you've got this, here's where you're going to end up, I certainly wouldn't have needed their quote unquote help, because now looking at where I am with the Jordan Harbinger Show, 4.5 to 5, whatever years on after my other show that I did for 11 years, we're way, way, way ahead of where we're right now where we are. I'm 20 times bigger than I was after 11 years working with the other company. And the reason for that is I'm no longer pulling a bunch of dead weight constantly and trying to manage people that have no ability to just even get, like I said, get up at a reasonable hour of day, get their work done. I was babysitting, not managing. And I didn't know it at the time, but when I was forced to start over with the Jordan Harbinger Show, we've done in 4.5 years what we couldn't even do in 11 years with the other company. The revenue now is in just a few months, we're making more with the Jordan Harbinger Show than we made in a year with the other company at the peak of our earning, no recession. So it really, if I needed a sort of more, I wouldn't have believed that, because I'd go, oh, Jordan, you're just being cocky thinking, look at what I built. But when I have the scoreboard in front of me where I can see where we are now compared to where I was then and the whole company was then, it's just really obvious. I mean, the numbers don't lie.
Wow. So I was planning to go in a different direction with my second question, but now I'm curious to ask you. So you kind of, I guess, answered this for me, I guess. But a lot of times with podcasting, people are like, a lot of people think there isn't really a magic formula. There is no way to go from zero to growing a big podcast. A lot of it's luck and timing and all that.
Totally.
But you've, in a lot of ways, kind of proved that you can recapture that again. Because as you just said, you had a big show. I mean, that last show wasn't a small show by any stretch.
No, right.
And we eclipsed that now. So is it true that there were a lot of things that you were able to kind of replicate based on what you've learned to make the next show, the newest, like your show that you have now for 4 or 5 years, as big as it's become? So is it something that we can say, here are some of the common things that definitely work every time?
Yeah, I would say so. So one thing that I always harp on the Jordan Harbinger Show as well is your network is like an insurance policy that money could never buy. And what I mean by that is, when in my old company, I was constantly building connections. And that was another thing. I would build connections and I would try and have my business partners or other employees do the same thing. And they just were not interested. And then it became like, Jordan's the networking guy. And I was like, I don't want to be the only person doing this work in the whole company. But then when I left, it was really interesting because I thought, I'm screwed. How am I going to start over? This is going to be impossible. I spent 11 years building the other company. How am I going to recover? And what I did is I made 200 phone calls to people in my network that I'd set up because I thought, I need advice, I need help. And those people were ready and they were there and they helped out a lot. And that was a major, major part of my recovery. And I also found that some of the guys that I'd left behind in the old company, the partners who didn't bother, they were calling some of the same people and they'd go, it's funny, your former business partners are emailing me, asking me for this favor. And I'm like, I haven't talked to those guys in 5 years, but I talk to you every 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Why do they think I'm going to help them? And I thought, this is the thing that you don't notice when you're just reaching out, being friendly with people, helping them out with no expectation of getting something in return, digging the well before you're thirsty, because nobody thinks I'm going to be thirsty, right? So they don't bother. And then when you're thirsty, you're like, good thing I did that. And I, again, to contrast it to my old colleagues, they just didn't bother because they thought, I don't need to worry about this. We're amazing. Jordan's got his handle on this. And so when I had to recover, it was like, wow, thank goodness that I was actually walking the walk in terms of digging that well, making those connections, maintaining those relationships, because they turned out to be one of the major, major factors in my recovery. So I recommend people do dig the well before you get thirsty, build relationships before you need them, because when you need them, it's too late. And that's why networking feels awkward to so many people, because they go, I feel embarrassed to reach out. Well, you're not embarrassed to reach out to your friends who you talk to regularly. You're embarrassed to reach out to people in your quote unquote network because you only reach out when you need something. And that is awkward, and you should feel awkward and weird about that. But if you're reaching out to people to check in, see what they're doing, how you can help them, etc., or just to say hello, it doesn't matter, you're seeing them at events, then it's not weird to reach out to somebody and make an ask, because even if they say no, it's not like you're not embarrassed by that, right? You're just reaching out to people you know with an ask. So build that network, definitely maintain it. It's worthwhile, even if you never, quote unquote, you're never going to need it. You just never know when you're going to need it, and that's the whole idea. The other thing is, people can take away assets, right? You could lose your house, you could lose your business, you could lose your email list, you could lose your Twitter account. I mean, I lost all of those things except for the house. I lost, all the corporate assets when I left the company, and including some of the social media accounts. And I will say that I was not, the thing you can't lose beside your network is your skill set. So yes, you're going to build corporate assets. Yes, you're going to build your email list, your following, whatever it is. But what they can't take away is your skill set. So when I started to rebuild the Jordan Harbinger Show, I still had the ability to create a good interview with a guest. I still had the ability to produce audio, to manage a team of audio production experts, to market a show. I had 11 years of knowledge in that area. And so that's one of the reasons why, and I feel bad, I keep contrasting this to my old company, but we're talking about recovery here, I guess. One of the reasons we bounced back so quickly, and one of the reasons that company tried to sue me and said, you can't compete with us, which they didn't win that, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. But they were worried, because it was like, this guy spent 11 years building a skill set and knows how to do this. We don't want that. We want him to crawl in a corner, crawl in a hole and die. Like, that's why we separated. So they can't remove your skills. They can't remove your knowledge base. So those things are bulletproof unless you get some sort of, head injury when you separate or when you start a new venture. And I would also, a lot of people say, well, I'm going from, I don't know, investment banking into digital media. Nothing overlaps. Wait a second. Things always overlap. You just may have to zoom out. You may go, oh, but it's banking and digital marketing or whatever your new niche is. Those things don't overlap. Okay, but you've been dealing with clients, reaching out to people and using professional communication. You've been at whatever. I mean, you can always find overlaps in whatever you used to do and then in what you do now, and you will figure out where those things come in handy. Yeah, banking and digital media might be kind of far away, but then again, your skill sets will transfer over and they will come in handy. And I think people need to remember that, because it's really easy to get bummed out if you're in a big transition point in your business or in your life and be like, nothing I've done then is going to prepare me for what I've done now. And the truth is, you've probably done a lot of things that have prepared you for what you now need to do. You just don't really know it yet.
Amazing. Well, I have a follow-up to that, but I'll leave it until after my main question to see if we have another minute to tackle it. But the main question I wanted to ask you about, Jordan, is this idea, and I won't go into all the backstory of where this idea came to me, but I recognize that being on a plane, so I'm working on this fictional book about being on a plane, and this passenger beside you, you ask him for advice, and he gives you this wise advice like a sage that he's learned in the years since. And so what I want to ask you about, rather than getting all the context behind it, is if you were sitting on a plane next to somebody, let's say a 15, 16-year-old, and they're like, hey, I recognize you from the Jordan Harbinger Show. That might not be the case, but let's say that's it. And they say, I'm just starting out my journey. I need a leg up. What would you tell me? And so I realized that it's similar to the time machine question, but of course the difference is, what advice would you give somebody else versus Jordan, where you said Jordan didn't need those partners early on. What would you tell somebody that you just met if they said, help, I need some life advice? Do you think it would be different?
I think, I don't know how different it would be. I think if I had known about that, the thing is, I knew about the networking stuff when I was in my 20s, but I was like, it's for old people, or I don't really need it. But I kept it in the back of my head because I did see the success early on that people who are well connected were having. And so I would probably tell that exact sort of story, and I'd say, I know you think you don't need this right now, but trust me, this is the best thing to do. The other thing is, young people who are looking at networking, for example, they don't think they have anything to offer, so they don't try. They're like, I got to work my way up to X level before I am on par with all these people that I want to network with, and that's not really how it works. When you are young, or when you don't have any money, or whatever it is, what you can do is you share things like knowledge. People will go, oh, well, I don't have anything to offer Mark Cuban because he's a billionaire and I'm just some schmo kid. People like that are always researching. They're always learning. So if you find something that you think is really relevant to what they've been talking about, but they probably haven't seen it, or it's in their sphere of personal interest, you can send that to that person. So people will send me podcasting stuff. For sure I've seen it because I read Pod News and I'm on this whatever board, and people who created that thing pitched me already and blah, blah, blah. But I'm really interested in weird stuff like North Korea or kooky stuff about China, whatever it is. So when people send me that stuff, I'm like, I haven't seen this because I'm working and I have 2 kids, but this is interesting. And then I get in a dialogue with them that way, and I start to appreciate those things. Or they might go, hey, look, I know you've got a million guests, but this guy has an incredible story where real example, a listener reached out and was like, hey, love your show. By the way, I work out at a gym, and this guy, he used LiDAR, which is like laser radar, to find a city, lost city in the jungle in Honduras that nobody believed was there. So this is like straight out of Indiana Jones. I know him. Would you be interested in this guy? And I started researching this, and I was like, this is a freaking cool story. So I got a show guest out of it. I went to that guy's house. The show fan came over during the filming, so I got to know him there. And then he reached out recently, and he's like, hey, don't know if you remember me, but I'm graduating from school. I'm looking for a job in media production. Do you know anyone? And of course, I'm like, let me help with this guy out if I can. Not like, gosh, I get 100 of these a day, because I owe that guy one. Like he came up with a really good show that turned out to be a big hit. And so, yeah, I did really well. And so you want to be able to do things like that. And it'd be really easy for him to go, oh, Jordan knows everyone, I shouldn't even bother emailing him. But he took a swing. It was a hit. And now we're connected. And I think young people underestimate their ability to do that. You're consuming podcasts, you're watching YouTube for a bunch of hours a day as entertainment. You probably do have a better handle on emerging creators or stories or whatever than somebody who's super busy like me with a show and a business and 2 kids and a wife, you probably are consuming more new stuff than I am. So I do rely on those types of connections. And Mark Cuban finds investment because people email him something and go, I know you got 5 minutes. Here's an idea we have. Here's why it's different. Here's the deck. And he'll go, all right, on the, at the airplane gate, look through it and go, okay. And then they do a call and ... He gives you $10 million or whatever. And that type of thing happens all the time. But young people often will not shoot their shot, or they'll do it in an inappropriate way. Like, hey, can we jump on the phone for half an hour and I can walk you through this? And it's like, nope, I get 1,000 of those a week. We're definitely not doing that. But if you can catch my attention with something like that that's useful for me or my business, then great. And if you can't do something business related, do something related to my personal interests. And you can find those by looking at social media, LinkedIn, whatever. And you're gonna get to me faster if you don't send me something about podcasting, but if you send me something about North Korea or traveling to a place that I go to regularly, that's going to get through the filter, and that works for everyone. Pretty much.
So, Jordan, you answered my follow-up question anyway, because my follow-up question was simply going to be for somebody that's saying, how do I get this big guest on my show? Or the other side was, why is it that I could hear one person on your show that's like this household name that we know of, and then the next guest could be like an undercover cop, somebody who was in an undercover gang. And so you kind of answered, I think, all that at once. I mean, partly has to do with your interests. And I assume the person, like I heard Chelsea Handler on your show, I assume that when you have a big name guest on, there's a reason. It's not just because you want to have a big name guest on the show. So that was kind of my question. How do you get the big names if you're newer? And you kind of answered that, like doing stuff for people, sending them stuff not related to podcasting, but maybe their interests, realizing they only have 5 minutes, not 30 minutes to sit with you. So I think you've answered all that. I don't know if you wanted to even go one step further for another couple of seconds before we let each other go.
Sure.
Just, like why you would maybe have a Chelsea Handler on, like I say, and then a rock climber right afterward.
Yeah. So sometimes the rock climber, for sure, I'm interested in. Chelsea Handler, she has an interesting story and she's funny, so I'll have her on. But some of those big names, they just kind of fall in my lap. I know a lot of creators and podcasters, they'll do something where they're like, I only want famous people on. And that's vanity. They want to get clicks on TikTok and YouTube, and they also want to take selfies with these people. I don't give a schmuck about that. I almost cursed on your show. I don't give a crap about that. I am not here to... My kids aren't going to think I'm cool because I have a selfie with Shaq. They are never... They're just not. It's a generational thing. So who am I trying to impress? Strangers on the internet? I'm good, thanks. So I'd rather have somebody that's interesting, that people have never heard of, rather than somebody who's going to get quick attention and then people move on because they don't care about the other guests on the show. So I would say, after doing this for a decade and a half, doing podcasting, you really don't see a whole lot of new listeners because you get Kobe Bryant, Shaq, Chelsea Handler. You get one-off listens, but then people don't care about your show. I'd rather have people that really are into whoever I'm talking to just because the topics are interesting, and that's better and more fun for me anyways. Celebrities are hard to wrangle. They cancel all the time. I mean, it's just a pain. Why do that when you can get a world famous rock climber who will show up to your house and, stay in touch with you for 5 or 10 years? That's much more rewarding. So when I do have a celebrity, it's because they've usually got something to promote. Their publicist is like, Jordan always replies, hey, do you want Chelsea Handler? Sure. Can she do it in LA? Great. Here's the studio where we're going. Great. Done. I don't spend years chasing these people. It's not worth it. The juice ain't worth the squeeze. And I'd much rather have a much longer, more interesting conversation with somebody who doesn't have a lot to lose. When you ask a celebrity something, they have to go, okay, I got to be kind of PC here. I got to be careful here. I got to answer it this way. When you ask a real question, they kind of don't really want to answer it most of the time. But if you get a regular person, they're not thinking, what would my publicist tell me to do right now? They're just going to answer the question. So the conversations are much more real and interesting, in my opinion. And I think, while it's great to have celebrities on your show, it's overrated. It doesn't really matter much. You can do it a few times a year and you get credibility, or you look like the kind of show that can pull those types of guests, but not as good for the audience, and, bottom line, not as good for the audience, harder to wrangle, lower quality of show, in my opinion, most of the time. And so not really something you should focus on.
Jordan Harbinger, always a pleasure, my friend. I thank you so much. Never disappoint. So I so appreciate you. I salute you. And of course, we'll continue to wave the flag for all the great stuff you're doing. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate it, man.
Awesome. We'll let you run, my friend.